Hi, Miss Gayle here from the Boulder City Library. I wanted to share with you something that I made, and it's quite easy and a whole lot of fun. This is very small. It's a card. It's a little piece of cardstock. And I can show you some up-close things. This is something I made that had to do a lot with what we've all been going through with the quarantine, the lockdown, whatever you want to call it. It's rough. So what I did was I made this little piece, and when I do anything with art, I always like to make it tell a story or a statement or something like that. Sometimes some of my pieces are just strictly for fun and they're whimsical and there's really no story other than it's a little on the whimsical side. My statement, of course, was the piece that I put right here, and it says, "Out of limitations comes creativity." And I don't know if anybody else has found this to be true, but I certainly did. All of these new limitations that I've been given, I've had to learn to work with them. I've had to learn to work with what I've been given. Definitely, creativity comes out of that. You have to get very creative when you can't find all the things that you normally could find, or things that aren't getting done the way that they normally get done. Life has kind of been turned upside down, and we have to think creatively to do things differently. So that's what this is all about. And it reminds me of the little butterfly. That's why the butterfly is there. The butterfly is there because before it becomes a butterfly, it's in its little cocoon, and it's dark in a small space, and it can't get out and it can't do anything. Now, if I were stuck in a dark space like that for a long time, I might be afraid or I might be anxious. And I don't know if the butterfly feels that way. But the whole time the butterfly is in that very dark and quiet cocoon, it's changing. And it's becoming something very, very different than what it was. Anyway, I thought of this as a time of change, which is why I put the butterfly in there. And then I have a lot of little numbers all through here. These little teeny numbers. These are stamps. And numbers are here throughout because that was quite important in this whole thing, was the numbers. There were all kinds of numbers, the numbers of cases, and they were worldwide, and they kept going up, and we were watching those numbers very, very carefully. Put this person here, just kind of watching it all. I mean, she's just very calmly watching it all. I don't know what to do, but I'm just going to sit back and watch it and see what happens. So she's there, and then the clock, I've got one up here on the top, and then I've got another one down here. Time and clocks are very closely related to this whole thing in many, many ways. And what I personally was thinking of was just the times are changing. Here we've got time cut in half. And then I've got this little guy here with the glasses, this little bird. He's just kind of a favorite of mine. I like to put him in most of my work. There is some sort of relation between the idea of him wearing these glasses and seeing things anew, which we're all going to have to get used to. When I make art, I try to make it so that whoever's looking at it can come to their own conclusions about what it means to them. So I do like open-ended art. Okay, now we'll go on to how I made this. First, I'll tell you what I started with, and it was just a piece of cardstock. Another thing I like to use sometimes is a little box. This had a frozen pizza in it, and I kind of like the size of this square right here. So I'm just going to cut up this box and use it just like that. And it's very sturdy. There's my square. No matter what you decide to use, it's best to gesso it. Gesso is something you need to put on just about everything. And this is what I use, just some white gesso. And gesso is your friend. Gesso prepares the surface to accept all kinds of media. And I do love my mixed media. In mixed media, you just never know what you're going to do, so it's good to just have everything gesso, because everything will go fine with gesso. It prepares your surface for painting or whatever you're going to do. This cardboard from this box, it's really soaking this up. And so if you just put plain paint on it without putting the gesso first, it would just eat up all your paint and it wouldn't give you the best of colors. So you want to make sure though, after you put your gesso on, always make sure that it's really, really dry. Some people use hair dryers, which is fine, or they have the heat tools, which is also fine. But I usually just let it sit to dry while I wash out my brush. And I just did a thin layer. You could go as thick as you want. You can also put the gesso on with a sponge, with your fingers. Some people use like a palette brush or a old gift card or something, and they just smear it around. Anything that'll smear it around works fine. So while it's drying, let's go over some of the things that we're going to use. The only things that I used on here were ink pads, stamp pads, things like that. And then I also use stamps, of course. Stamps, I've got all kinds of different stamps. And at the very end, I believe I used some of these pens. They are opaque pigment markers. Opaque pigment markers. And so you can always use these at the very end for touching up little things, if you want to add a little extra detail. In this tutorial, I go over the technique that I used to make this, and I also go over some of the supplies. There's information about ink pads that we will be using in this, and the different types of ink. If you're familiar with ink pads, masks, and stamping in general, you can just skip all of the informational part and get right on to the project. I think we need to talk about some inks because I got super confused when I was trying to figure out what ink works best, because we have to use two different types of ink. The smudgy stuff in the background, that is ink that can be moved around, something that doesn't dry right away. And I did some research, and what I'm going to tell you is some of the things that I found out on the research, but not in any way, shape, or form the end-all, be-all of ink pads. I'll just tell you what I found out. So this is my box. I've got this little plastic bin, and it's got my ink pads and ink in it. These are best stored upside down so that when you go to use them, it'll be all the ink will be up at the top where you're putting your stamp. Some of these I write on things I need to know, like this will not smudge. I don't even know where I got this one. So because it didn't have any information, I just went ahead and wrote on here what I thought I would need to know. It will not smudge. You're going to want something today that will not smudge, and you want something today that will smudge. Do you have a lot of these for children? Working with children all these years, washable is very important. Washable is one that will not set, will not dry fast. There's two main inks. You've got dye ink, which is the most common. So there's some that are heavy. This says dye ink right on it. It's acid-free dye ink. When it says dye ink, that means it's fast drying and it is water-based. It will absorb into the paper and it is washable. So because it goes into the paper, it just kind of connects with all those paper fibers and it locks it in. When you add water though, or a liquid like Mod Podge to seal it, it's going to run a bit because it's washable. We also have the pigment ink, and these are some examples of the pigment ink. It just says pigment on it. Pigment ink works a little differently than dye ink. It dries slowly and it doesn't absorb into the paper like the dye ink, but it sits on top of the paper. It can be heat set, and sometimes it's a little thicker, like in the case of the chalk. The chalk one is kind of a thicker ink. So those are the two main kinds. And then you also have distress inks, just this one little thing. And these are usually used to put on the edges of things to make them look old or to kind of frame it. And it's all scraggly. And it's for things like that. You just go along the edge to get your edges done. So that's what distress ink is usually all about. There's other things you can do with it. Then we have the hybrid. These are hybrid stamp pads. So it's a combination of the pigment and of the dye. It dries faster than the pigment, but it's less likely to bleed or run or smudge like these. So that's where the hybrid would be nice to use. Then you have the chalk inks, which is this one that I showed you already. It's good on dark paper. It gives a very soft pastel look on dark paper. And then we have the Stays On, which are these. This is a solvent ink. It is quick drying and opaque. It is permanent. These are great for slick surfaces. For instance, the back of this box that I've gessoed the side of it, the inside. This is the outside of the box, and it's kind of slick. It's kind of a glossy. You can see some shine and shimmer in there, so it's kind of glossy. If you stamped using this ink, it goes really well on this kind of a surface. You might even use those on Shrinky Dinks. If you remember Shrinky Dinks, or that acetate paper, clear plastics, and things like that. So these are perfect for that. Also glass, metal, and wood. Then we have, this one is Archival Ink, and we're going to definitely use this today because this is the other kind that we need. This is the kind you can stamp something down and then you can watercolor over it, or you can use your inks and it won't smear. See what I mean when we get going on that one. So this is definitely the one we're going to use today. What I did personally, because even after I did all this research, I was still a little bit confused because there's a lot. I mean, there's just so many different things. This is Pigment Ink, but it doesn't say so right there. So what I did was I wrote on here, because after I tried it out, it didn't smudge. So this is a good one to use if you don't want to smudge. If you want to stamp this and then go over with some watercolor or something like that, it should do really well. I made up a cheat sheet because even after learning all of this stuff, which was good, and I did learn a lot, I still had some questions about my particular stamps because some of them didn't really fit any of them, or like in the case of this one, I didn't know what it was. It wasn't labeled or anything. So what I did was I made my own little cheat sheet. I keep this all the time. Every page was gessoed first, and then I let it dry, and then I just did a little test. And what I did was I used my same little stamp. You can use any little stamp. This is just my little notes, and you make your own notes that make sense to you. But this is what made sense to me considering what I have. I don't know what everybody else has, so feel free to make your own things. But like this one says color box and liquid chalk. Well, that's what this says on here. So I'm guessing this is this one. It looks the same color. What I did was I stamped on it, and then I just immediately took my fingers and did this. And so this one didn't dry like that. It was a very slow to dry one. Then after I let it dry, I went over it with Mod Podge. Or you can also use glue and water or something like that. But I went over it with another liquid to see if I could reactivate it. This one did not reactivate if you let it dry. So now I know that if I want something in this color to stay put, the ink will not move in this one. This one, which is also color box, and this is the pigment one. This says pigment on there. This is the pigment one. It was, as soon as I stamped it, I was able to smudge it, and then even after I completely let it dry, I went over it with something else. It smudged a little bit. I mean, you can see a little bit of orange around it, but it did move it a little bit. So when I want to do something like this project here with the butterfly, I'm going to pick something that I'm going to give it that little smudge test. I'm going to use my cheat sheet and go, okay, this one I can use. This one's not going to work at all because it was just gone. It just disappeared. But I'm good. That might be handy for something else, and I'll show you in just a minute. So I just go through my cheat sheet. This would be a great one. And then I even made little notes, like it says you could put it on plastic. Once it dries, it stays, and that's the Stays On. And then here's some that were called Stamp Affair. Some old ones I had for so long, I don't even remember where I got them. This one did not do well for staying in one spot. I would suggest you just get all of your ink pads out, gesso some papers, staple them together, and then make yourself a little cheat sheet like I did. For today, what we want is one ink that will not move at all when you add water to it, and that's going to be this one. And that's how I made the stamps. All the stamps, that's how I did that. The opposite of that would be the kind that does move. Then you have to look for things like this one would be perfect for the background, because what I did here was I just smushed around color all over the background. And so at that point, you don't want it to stay put. You want it to kind of move and blend in with the other colors. There's my ink spiel. Now onto the stamps. These, and if you already know all this stuff, you can just skip right on to the project. This is one of my boxes of stamps, and I've got all different kinds in here, and it's good to know that there are different kinds. There's the acrylic, there's the rubber stamps. Those you have to be real careful with, especially living out here in the desert. They will dry out. What I also need is some of the stamps. I use a mask, and so that's what this little envelope is here. It's got all of the little masks that I made. Once I make one, I'm going to hang on to it so I don't have to do it again. And here's where you would want to use a mask. So let's say you've got your stamp. I'm just going to put it right here on the envelope. So there's a nice little letter J. And then let's say you want to put something around it, but you don't want the thing to get on it. How would you do that? Well, let's say you want to use this kind of cool looking pattern here, and you want to get like all around your J without getting it on the J. That's where the mask comes in handy. And you can put it, just put it down like that, and you can leave it there. If you're afraid it's going to move on you, you can grab some washi tape. This kind of tape is not real sticky, or you could use painter's tape if you have some. Or you can just like hang on to it. I'm just going to take a little tiny piece of washi tape and put it on here. And then it won't move for sure. Okay, once you have your little bit of washi tape on, I'm using hybrid ink, the hybrid ink. So you just get your little thing all inked up, and then you can just go right over the top of it. Underneath there. And so you cover, if you wanted to like cover the whole thing, you could do it that way, but this is for if you want to cover some a big area that's got one of your little stamps in there. You don't want your stamp all messed up. So there's your J, and it went right up to the J but didn't go on to the J. That's what masks are for. So when you make a mask, it's a really good idea to hang on to them in case you ever want to do it again. Or you could just make more if you want. But I just stick them in a little envelope, and I keep them in with my stamp. Well, I hope that helped with some of the ink questions you may have had. And of course, I think the very best thing to do would be to just take what you already have, experiment with it, make your own cheat sheet, and then you'll know for sure exactly what ink will do what. So now is the time where I'm going to take a look at what colors I want, what stamps I want to use. When I'm looking through my colors and things as far as the ink, this is how we're going to do the background. These have to be, remember, the kind that you can smudge really easily. So if you need to do some smudge testing, now is a good time to do it. For smudging, I'm just going to grab some scrap paper here. This is my cheat sheet chart. Boy, that's hard to say. And I've already gessoed this page, so I'm just going to use that because it's already ready to go. What I'm looking for is different inks that will smudge and blend. There's a couple ways. You've got little cotton swabs, always work good. These little makeup spongy thingies, I like them a lot. A lot of times I use these. I think they're also makeup things that they have at the dollar store, little smudgy, you can smudge with them. So find something you're comfortable with. I want to use the pigment inks. anything that sits on top of the paper or the canvas or whatever you're doing, and that will dry slowly. Like this is a pigment. This is a pigment one, and so I'll just use one of my little, I guess you could even use your fingers, I don't know. Yeah, you can use your fingers too. So I'm just going to grab the sponge, and I'm getting all of this lovely orange on there, and I'm just going to go around and around and smudge it all over the place. This is how we start. So pick some colors that you want, plus make sure they're smudgeable. Make sure that you can smudge them. First thing we're going to start with is the stamps, and I'll show you the ones I use, and of course you use whatever you want. I used the butterfly. I also used this stamp. Out of limitations comes creativity. Here's the little clock stamp that I used. My favorite little bird there with his glasses. And the numbers. The lady with a lot on her mind. And the honeycomb. So for this part, we'll want to use the Archival Ink that is permanent, and I'm using the Ranger Archival Ink. It is permanent and it won't smudge, and I've already tested this out. Sometimes I'll lay out kind of what I'm going to do, which is what I did, but if you're going to repeat things, obviously you can't lay everything out. And just a little note on composition, the rule of thirds is a good one to follow, and that's breaking your surface up into 3 parts instead of halves. So I'm going to begin with the butterfly, because I know I want that right about here. I don't want it smack in the middle like that, because I really want to incorporate it with the words. I want these to be something that comes together, which is why I put the yellow around the majority of it to unite them. And I used this. This is a very handy tool when it comes to stamping. So I'm going to do my clear stamps first. So I have it set up for that. So I'm arranging, I want that there, and I'd like that right underneath. And the others are a different kind of stamp, so I have to use them the second go round. But I've already placed those, so I'm just going to press down on here, and it's going to hold on to that for me. So I'm going to move it over here so you can still see it. Yes, you can still see it. And I'm going over with my permanent ink because I don't want this to move. I want to be able to put something over it, another ink. I don't want it to reactivate when it comes into contact with another ink or another liquid of any kind. So we're going to just put that down there. And there's the butterfly. I would like her. I'm not going to use all of her, but mostly I want her face in there, and then just some of the gears and some of the things that you would cause her to be doing a lot of thinking, ruminating. So she can go there. And then I had my little bird down here. I don't want his head going down. I want it to be, he's up, he's looking around and noticing things with those glasses. He's getting a good idea of how things are going. And this one I'm leaving off a little bit off of the edge, mainly because there's not a whole lot of room here, and you know it's a clock. You can tell it's a clock. I'll have to redo this to put the clock up over there as well. But for now, this is where I want things. So I'll open that up. And now I'm going to ink all of these things. And I'll probably jump forward because watching somebody ink something isn't the most fun you can have in a day, right? Well, there are the stamps on, and now I want to add these. That's the background stuff, but I don't want it necessarily on what I've already stamped. That's where the masks come in really handy. Because I've done this before, I have the masks for all of these, and then some. To make a mask is quite simple. You can take any scrap paper, put your stamp down. You can trace around it and cut it out, or you can stamp and cut out the stamp. And it's just that simple. So you would just cut it out like so. Then you've got something that will cover up your stamps. So I'm just going to go ahead and put them all on here. I did want to add some of these numbers, and they are right here. Because they're a bunch of individual things, I'm going to put them on here to make it easier. And I'm just going to put them all on upside down, sideways. I'm more concerned with the pattern that they're going to make all together than I am with the orientation of each individual number. I'm just going to let them be. And that's what I wanted. Now I'll just ink that up. And I want them mostly to come over here. And see what that's done is it's kept it away from the stamp that I put on the butterfly. There's a piece of it there, but it didn't get on to where I didn't want it for the, I really want the butterfly to pop and stand out by itself. I didn't want to cover it with numbers. But I did want to put my numbers in there and incorporate them. And that's how you do that. I think I'll put a few more down here, not too far. In fact, I think I don't want any down here at all, so I'm just going to stop it there with a scrap piece of paper. Okay. I'm liking that. So this kind of acts as filler for that blank space, that empty space. The next one I used was this shape here. And I did use it fully here, and I tried real hard to line them up so that they would look like a continuous piece. Didn't always happen, but you know what? That's okay. I'll put my masks back on these pieces here, and one on this. For some reason, I don't have one for the bird, so I'll just use this lady that I've had before. She should work just fine. And I'll stick the J on the clock. Okay, so now I think I've got everything covered up that I don't want to get stamped with this stamp. I was going in a rather diagonal direction that way with the numbers. So I think I'll go this way with this shape here. So I'll hold everything down. This is where washi tape comes in real handy, and I didn't use it. And because you've got the clear block, you can actually line it up probably better than what I just did. And one more here in this corner. So there we have that. Now all my stamping has been done with the permanent ink. Now we move on to the color. When selecting the color, I was going for highlighting and bringing out the butterfly. It's the light. It's coming out. It's changed. It's ready for a whole new adventure. And I just really wanted it to pop. The first color you want to use is the lightest of the colors that you select. I'll go with the yellow first. Basically, I want the yellow around the butterfly. And I'm going to go beyond a little bit because I'm going to add other colors and they'll blend together. So that will actually get rid of the yellow and most likely create a new color. As you can see, there was a little bit of green here where I had gone beyond with my yellow, but I brought in some of the blue and it became green. Give your space plenty of room for your colors. And I'm just using the little makeup sponge. There are tools you can buy for it, if you're so inclined. I also want these words to really pop. A little brighter yellow there. I'll go over these words with the yellow. If you're familiar at all with color theory or how color is used in art, you can make your color choices according to that. If you're not, you can just go with whatever you think looks good. The next space, or spaces, I used a red. And I went with the primary colors thinking that they would indeed blend, giving me some of the secondary colors. That's why I did that. If you have a color and you're wondering about it, like I just did, I couldn't remember. So I thought I'll just give it the old smudge test. It's on the back, so it's not going to show. But as you can see, if you can press it down and pull it, and you can see it left a line. It looks like the shape that I stamped onto it. This is not going to smudge. It won't blend well. So this will not work. So if you're in doubt before you want to try something, just try it out on scrap paper. This is the hybrid. I've not used it before, so I didn't know if it was going to blend nicely or not, but it seems to. You can move it around once you get it on there. Apparently you've got to move pretty fast. Okay, so we're going to give the hybrid a try. I'm going to go ahead this time though and go over this in red, and I think I'm just going to yellow this one down here. I have no idea why, but that's just what I'm thinking. The hybrid seems to be smudging up here, so I'm not using hybrid anymore for this. I'll use it for other things, not for this. I'm going to go with coral instead, and I need to get a new place on my sponge because that's getting all used up. So I'm just going to go here so I don't get ink all over my ink pad. This is a little pinkish. That's nice. This seems to be a little kinder to my ink, to my permanent ink. Probably because it's a hybrid, it's a little bit of washable and a little bit of the pigment. So maybe that's why it did that. I'm not sure. But it's okay to experiment. I'm going to put some over here. I'm going to leave the rest of it for the blue. And you can just blend. I kind of like the little lines that it's making there. That's really pretty. So I'm going to go with that. I'm going to quick grab this yellow clock that I forgot about first time around. I was so busy with the butterfly I didn't even pay attention to this little clock down here. But this one I want it to be highlighted as well. So the rest will all be the bluish color. That one I'm using chalk, Colorbox Chalk Deep Lagoon. I think it's a really pretty color. I'm going to find a new surface, a new spot on my sponge. This is the darkest color, so it goes on last. And this little lady right there. And that's it for the painting, even though it wasn't really paint, it was stamp pads. But that's how I did that. It's called a bandana technique. I think it kind of has a tie-dye-ish look. But feel free to call it whatever you want. I think I might just put some little bit of these blues, kind of unite those colors there. A little bit over here. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now all that's left is just some of those little details, and that's if you want to. You certainly don't have to. I mean, I think it looks kind of neat like this. If I were going to leave it like this and not do any highlighting or shadows or anything, I would probably just go around it with my little distress ink. My teeny tiny little distress ink. I would probably just go like this, and I just glide it over the edge. I'm doing it at kind of an angle. I don't know if you can see. Not flat and not up and down, just kind of a little angle there. So that kind of gives it some definition, a strong line at the edge to say this is the end of the page. You probably could figure that out by yourself, but I don't know. It gives it a finished look. Go heavy there on the corners. If you don't happen to have a butterfly on yours, you don't really need to color anything in. I'm just going to be adding some colors because it's a little butterfly, and I did it on this one, and I like that. The thing that I found that worked the very best for the white is one of these whiteout pens. Of course, you have to shake it up really good. And I've got a scrap bit of cardboard over here that I'm going to use to just get it started and to make sure that I don't have big old clumps going on before I go in here. But I'm just going to go over the letters. That was a bit much. There we go. Just a little bit, just to make it stand out. And if you want, you can go over some of your little elements. If you want highlights, that's where this comes in handy. So I've got these pens that I use, and I have them stored upside down. Bad me. So that's the way it should be. Have all the ink on the ends, but no, I did it wrong. The newer ones are gonna work for me. And now you can go in and fill in whatever you want, color it in. Don't probably need to show the whole thing. I'm sure you get the idea. And there's going to be things on yours that are going to be very different from mine. I do have a gold one. I think I'm going to go use my gold one for bits and pieces here on the clocks, because they're gold. Just little teeny tiny. I'm not really coloring them in. I'm just kind of giving them just hints of color here and there. If you don't want to do this, that's fine. It's your art. It's your thing. You'll find things that you like, and you'll find things that you don't like. I think half the fun is experimenting and seeing what you can do with different things, what creates different looks. And I did put a little bit of silver around her. And I don't know that I would do it. This one is a little clearer, so I might leave it. I might add a little bit of silver up here. But I'll play around with it. I just basically wanted to show you this is the process, the technique that I used to get this. And you can do the same thing. You can use the same technique using your own colors and your own different stamps and your own placement of things that mean something to you or that you're going to have fun with. So go create something of your very own and enjoy the process. Bye for now.